A familiar game for the Atlanta Hawks as they were in the game all the way to the end, ended up losing, though, by 10 points in Charlotte on this Wednesday evening into Thursday. And with the loss, they fall behind the Hornets in the standings. It was a play-in preview of sorts, and the Hawks just were not able to get the win. We'll get into all of that coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1200 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you on a Wednesday evening into Thursday. And thank you for joining us, as always, making the Locked On Hawks podcast your first listen each and every day. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and our YouTube channel. Again, this is episode 1200, and a great time to thank everybody for listening to the podcast, as always, and subscribing to the show and supporting the show. I really do appreciate it. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll already have seen this, but I'm on the road. I'm in a hotel, and it's actually quite late. I am dragging. I had a travel disaster, to say the least, on this Wednesday evening into Thursday. So I'm recording this at like 5 a.m. Eastern time. It's been that kind of night, if you can imagine. So my apologies for the late delivery of the show, but please give me some leeway as if I were to stumble over anything on this podcast, it's because I haven't slept really at all. So alas, we'll dive into what became a 116-106 loss for the Hawks in Charlotte. Certainly a game that they could have won, and they had a chance in this spot to get above 500 the first time since December 6th. They had a chance for the fourth straight win, and it was pretty tight all the way. Honestly, this game was very narrow the entire way. And I'm not even sure how else to describe it. It was a single-digit game for the vast majority of the game. But the Hawks were actually tied in this spot with 5 minutes to go, and they were not able to close it out. The ending was not favorable, to say the least, on either end of the floor for Atlanta, and that leads to what became a loss in their 35th loss of the season. They're now 12-22 on the road in 21-22 season. So as far as the context for this game coming into the game, the Hawks were actually 2-1 against the Hornets this season. With this loss, they're now 2-2, and they sort of even up the season series in this spot. They're now done with the Hornets until probably the play-in or potentially the play-in. The Hornets actually won 2 in a row. They actually are a good offensive team, a bad defensive team. They're kind of a mirror image in some ways of the Hawks. They're not quite as good as the Hawks are on offense, but they've been better than the Hawks on defense this season by the numbers. Injury-wise, the Hawks were without John Collins in this game. Again, his third straight absence. There was the return of Gallinari, who ended up being probable, ended up playing, but he actually left this game and did not return. So we'll come back to him later on. But the Hawks were not 100% healthy in this spot. The Hornets weren't either, though. Gordon Hayward remains out for Charlotte, one of their better players. And the Hawks actually were small underdogs. It was kind of a coin flip in a lot of ways. Our friends at BetOnline made the Hawks 1.5 underdogs in the morning. They were 1-point favorites at one point on Wednesday afternoon, and then went back to the Hawks +1 tip-off. So basically what this game was a coin flip. I think if you look at the power ratings in Las Vegas, BetOnline, all those places, I think that is worth noting. The Hawks are seen as a better team than the Hornets, and the Hornets have the home court advantage in this game. But without Collins, that's pretty notable. But obviously, the Hawks did not cover because they did not win this game outright. As for the game itself, they started Gallinari, his return to action. No surprise there against Charlotte, starting lineup of P.J. Washington at the 4 and Mason Plumlee together. The Hawks started this game out pretty well. It was 8-3 at the outset. A couple threes early on from Herter and Hunter. The Hornets did have a 9-0 run early on to take their first lead of the game. And Nate had some frustration timeouts throughout this one. After an easy transition bucket in the first quarter, that was one that happened there. The Hornets scored 18 points in about 5.5 minutes at the outset, which was similar to what happened at the very end of this game. But the Hawks defensively were kind of a mess at times, especially on transition opportunities. Just kind of bad matching up. It was, it's obviously pretty dire when you're playing Trey and Danilo Gallinari together on defense. That kind of goes without saying, but it was some other breakdowns as well beyond the usual stuff. The Hawks were not taking very good. I mean, I wouldn't say they were taking bad shots. They were 3 of 11 on twos to start this game, but they were 4 of 7 on threes. They actually kind of had a pretty rough shooting night from both Trey and Bogdanovic. But Trey had a nice play in transition where he drew 2 guys, kind of up faked and found a Kongwu for a dunk. That was a pretty nice play that prompted a timeout from the Hornets. I thought Kongwu had some nice moments in his first stint, a couple of good contests at the rim, and also making up. He actually made his first 5 shots in this game. I believe, he was 7 of 8 in the game. I think he made his first 5. The Hawks did lead by 7 late in the first quarter before Charlotte hit a 3. They led by 4 points at the end of the period. They were 5-9 on threes and 9 assists in the first quarter. They scored very well, despite Trey not having a big night as a scorer in this game. They were actually prolific early and often. It just didn't necessarily translate to wins. Once DeLon Wright came in defensively, I think things definitely got better, and that was not a huge surprise. But offensively, the bench did not have it in this game either, so it was kind of a mixed bag throughout their minutes. The Hornets took their first lead of the game actually within about 90 seconds of the second quarter, and it was kind of back and forth from there. Okongwu played very well in his first stint, but he also had 3 fouls in 9 minutes, ended up with 4 fouls in 17 minutes of the game. So he was pretty good, but just obviously foul trouble is still a problem for the young big man at this point in time. The Hawks did have some success in the pick and roll when they were running it with Capella and Okongwu. That was pretty easy pickings against a bad Charlotte defense. But kind of crazy here. Trey and Bogdanovich missed their first 11 shots combined, and the Hawks were still winning, which was a little bit strange. But everybody else was shooting pretty well. Hunter was 5 of 5. The centers were 10 of 12 from the floor combined. They tried TLC late in the first half because Bogdanovich had been scuffling and they want to give him a break. TLC was fine, played 10 minutes, didn't do anything hugely positive, but I think he was pretty good on Monday and was okay on Wednesday. But Bogey really struggled, which we'll come back to later on. The Hawks were up by 5 at the halftime break after a 9-0 run that actually included a 3 by TLC late in the first half. Gallo missed the rest of the game, actually left the game late in the first half with a right biceps contusion, listed as questionable at that point, but then during halftime, he was ruled out of action and never returned. It could have been a play where he was fouled by Montrezl Harrell because he seemed like he was pretty much wincing in pain after that one, but we're all guessing at this point. We'll see if he can play on Friday, but obviously a loss to not have him in the second half of this game. And offensively, no problems in the first half. They had a 129 offensive rating, even with Bogey again and Trey sitting at 0-11 combined from the floor. The Hawks shot the ball well from 3. Otherwise, they were 10 of 18 from 3 at that point. Not at the line. Had 19 assists in the first half. Capella had a double-double before halftime, 15 and 11. So lots of prolific stuff on offense. Unfortunately, the defense was not very good in this game. So defensively, they had a 117 defensive rating against the Hornets. That's not terrible against Charlotte in particular because they're pretty good on offense. But the Hawks were victimized by 19 assists by the Hornets in the first half, 50% shooting, and it got pretty ugly at times. Before we get to the second half in this one and much more, a word from our sponsors on today's podcast. Today's a good example of my schedule being pretty crazy, and I use Athletic Greens because I actually wanted to be healthier, have more energy, and I really wanted to see what all the hype was about with Athletic Greens. And I've been on it for a while. AG1 is fantastic, and I absolutely love it. It's not really typical in that it's super healthy, but it doesn't really taste like that. I really look forward to taking it actually every single morning. And the first thing I have when I wake up is AG1, which is one delicious scoop of AG1 from Athletic Greens. You're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food sourced superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day on the right note. And they have a special blend of ingredients that support your nervous system, your immune system, your gut health, your energy, and gives you the ability to focus and recover. AG1 costs you less than $3 a day, and you're investing in your health. And really, it's cheaper than your cold brew habit. And AG1 also helps support your better sleep quality and recovery, as well as mental clarity and alertness. Athletic Greens has 7,000 or more 5-star reviews at this point in time, and recommended by professional athletes all over the place. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition, especially as we head into the flu and the cold season. It's just one scoop in a cup of water every day, and that's it. No need for a million different pills, supplements to look out for your health. Make it easy on you as well. Athletic Greens is giving a free 1-year supply of your immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase of Athletic Greens. All you have to do is go to athleticgreens.com/NBA network. That's athleticgreens.com/NBA network. Take ownership of your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. All right, we'll dive in now to the second half of this game. Ended up being TLC starting in place of Gallo to start the third quarter, which obviously people don't always love that, but Nate's a big fan of keeping guys in roles, so that was the idea there. I would imagine he didn't play a whole lot more after he started the third quarter. The Hornets briefly led, but other than that, it was basically the Hawks leading in the 2 to 5 point range for the vast majority of the third quarter. Trey didn't have his first field goal until 3 minutes to go in the third, which is pretty crazy. They brought in Lou before DeLon, but then DeLon came back in late alongside Lou. Nate called timeout late in the third quarter with some frustration, and actually Trey came out after that. But actually, it was worth noting, Trey went to the locker room at the end of the third quarter. The Hawks said he had a left knee or a left quad contusion. He was probable to return, but actually came back right on schedule. But worth noting, he actually said after the game that he said it was pretty sore. So we'll see how he responds between now and Wednesday. It would be obviously a huge loss if he couldn't play on Wednesday against Memphis. The Hornets then had a pretty late run, a 7-0 run at the end of the third quarter to tie the game, and that was pretty fitting in some ways that it was tied after 3 quarters. But the offense fell very flat, both with and without the starters in the third quarter. They scored 18 points. That doesn't happen to the Hawks team very often. They were 7-25 from the floor, 1 of 11 from three in that period. They held the Hornets down actually defensively and only lost the quarter by 5, which is actually a credit to the defense. But it was pretty much a rock fight in that third quarter, which is kind of not expected for these two teams. They brought Trey back in with about 10.5 minutes to go. They were down by 4 at that point. He had less juice for sure off the bounce. Not a huge surprise when you have a leg injury, but the Hawks, again, scored 39 points in the second half of this game. They were definitely a different team after halftime than they were before halftime. Part of that is Trey. Part of that was just that guys were not making shots. There was a huge dunk by Kongwu with about 9 minutes to go, which was a fun play. I think she probably got fouled as well. It was not called, but the dunk was pretty impressive on its own. The Hawks were down by 5, 7.5 minutes to go. Nate called timeout. There was actually a great contest before that by Kongwu on Rozier, but he finished it anyway. And Trey and Bogey both missed threes on possession before that, which is pretty much indicative of what transpired in the entire game. They brought the starters back with Bogdanovic and closed with that group. It was obviously Trey, Herter, Bogdanovic, Hunter, and Capella to close the game. And they tied the game with, like I said before, with about 4.5 minutes to go. Hunter had a jump shot to tie the game, and they ended up losing the game by 10. So minus 10 down the stretch. They lost that stretch 19-9. Pretty rough stuff. The Hornets hit a couple big threes. Rozier hit one that was pretty tough, actually, to go up by 7. 3 minutes to go. Then Trey turned it over. There was an and one by PJ Washington. It was a 10-point game at that point. It was probably over, and then it really ended for sure. About 9 seconds to go. The Hawks were down by 9 already, and the Hornets worked the entire shot clock, found an easy dunk at the end of the shot clock, and the Hawks were down 11, and that was basically the end of that. So, again, they lost the last 4.5 minutes by 10 points. It was 19-9. The offense was not great. I want to be fair about that. It was not just the defense, but the defense was very bad at the end of this game. They could have handled the entire game, the doubles and blitzes better that Trey was getting. He was the focus and ended up with 15 assists, actually, was passing out and doing the right thing most of the time. But guys just around him did not make plays down the stretch. They had a pretty good first half stretch. There was some tentative play. I thought McMillan talked about this after the game, but they passed on pretty good looks offensively, which I can definitely vouch for, having watched the tape back. So a rough one, to be sure, at the end of this game. As far as the overall game is concerned, the Hawks ended up with a 114 offensive rating, which is not bad at all. In fact, that's like what they average for the season. But against a bad Hornets defense and a head start, that was not a good second half, obviously. Trey and Bogey were 8 of 28 from the floor, which makes the numbers overall look better. But that's tough for the Hawks to win with those two guys, their best two perimeter creators, not doing much at all in terms of actually scoring and making shots. 28 assists, they had some good numbers there. On the glass, they were very good in this game. A bunch of guys had offensive rebounds. Capella had 7 of them, which was obviously prolific. But the Hawks just weren't that good on offense in this game. They were just okay. And then defensively, it was more of the same as usual, a 122 defensive rating. They allowed the Hornets to shoot 49% from the floor with 30 assists, 9 turnovers. And the Hornets, importantly, they had no turnovers in the fourth quarter and 57% shooting. So the Hawks lost that quarter by 10, and that was the story of the game. So as far as context is concerned, this is a loss in I'm gonna borrow from my friend Kevin Chenard of Hawks.com and ATL29, who said this on Twitter. I think it's probably the case. This is an important loss for sure for Atlanta in that the play-in mix is still up for grabs. It's a head-to-head loss against the team that you're competing with. It's not necessarily a bad loss, like in terms of context, because the Hawks, again, were like either slight favorites or slight underdogs. It was kind of there's no real like shame in losing a game like this, but they had a chance to win it. They didn't execute very well, so that leaves the frustration and sort of builds everything else. Of course, it's worth noting the Hawks just did win 3 games in a row. That does matter, but those games were much easier on the schedule, and they kind of just had to hold on for dear life in the last 2 of those. So some mixed bag stuff as usual for this Hawks team, but they lose this one. I think it wasn't the worst loss in the world, but at the same time, it was an important one, and they are now behind the Hornets in the standings as a result. Before we get to the last section of this podcast with some player evaluations and a look ahead to Friday's game, and word from our sponsors on the podcast today. It's that time of year again, and the tournament is finally upon us in college basketball with all the latest odds, totals, player props, futures, exotics, and more. BetOnline.net is the number one outlet for all of your sports betting needs, and beyond that, BetOnline remains the best spot for all of the sports scores that you need, the podcasts that you want, and the news that you have to have this season. And of course, not just basketball at BetOnline, because they have a full slate of offerings that includes live betting and your favorite casino games. They also have other sports like hockey and boxing, UFC, auto racing, golf, tennis, soccer. Baseball's coming back pretty soon, entertainment bets, horse racing odds, and everything else that you could possibly want in props and futures. Head to BetOnline right now or use your mobile device to learn more about all of the trends and all of the action you can find at BetOnline today. BetOnline, where the game starts. This will be a shorter show. Obviously, people might be listening to this probably figuring that out at this point in time, but I am, again, kind of fighting the good fight at this point, about 5 a.m. Eastern, alas. So Okongwu had a good night off the bench, 14 points on 8 shots, 5 rebounds, 2 blocks. He was -9, but everybody was minus on the bench basically. And the fouls were the only question mark, but I thought he played very well in 17 minutes. Capello was also good, which we'll come back to later on. But Lou Williams added 7 points on 5 shot attempts, including the free throws that he got, but was -13. Defensively, it was a mess, as always, with Lou, but there you go. DeLon Wright, a quiet one. He was better on defense than the rest of the guys on the perimeter, but that was not a huge bar to clear. TLC, I thought, gave them decent minutes with 5 points in 10 minutes. He didn't play great. I don't think he's a huge solution moving forward, but if they wanted to give Bogey a break, he gave them a break with Bogey. And speaking of Bogdanovic, 12 points on 16 shots, 3 of 8 on 2s, 2 of 8 on 3s, 4 rebounds, 2 assists. Not a good night from him. And by the way, this is the craziest stat of the Hawks recently. Bogdanovic in the last 6 games now is 9 of 48 from 3. It's not all about 3-point shooting, but for a guy that was red hot before this and red hot last year at times, 9 of 48 from 3 is just tough to overcome from the guy who takes the most threes on the team other than Trey. So tough scenes there for Bogdanovic, but that kind of gives you some context along the way. To the starters, I thought Herter played well in this game, 16 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals, was 2 of 7 on 2, which isn't great, but 4 of 9 on 3s. He was the one guy making threes in this game along with Hunter. The two of them were pretty good behind the arc. But I thought Herter had a good floor game and played quite well. He's actually +3 a game best for the Hawks. Capella, I thought, was really good as well. 17 points, 15 rebounds, I should say. Had a steal as well. Did miss some bunnies around the rim as he's wont to do, but I thought he played well, was a genuine positive defensively. Their best player on defense as usual. Hunter had some nice moments on the way to a game-high 21 points for the Hawks on 13 shot attempts, 3-4 from the free throw line. 3 rebounds, 2 assists. The rebounding still not there for Hunter, and I think late in the game he was kind of indecisive and didn't make a couple of pretty logical, what I thought were pretty easy plays that he just didn't make, but he was productive in this one, so I don't want to pick on him too much. And then Gallinari left the game early with 5 points in 14 minutes. Finally, Trae Young had an off shooting night. He was 3 of 12 from the floor and 0 of 6 on 3s. So only 9 points. It's very, very rare for Trae to play a whole game and not get to double figures in points. But to be fair to him, he was getting blitzed every possession and he had 15 assists in the game. So the passing was there. He could have had 20 assists pretty easily. There was some botched stuff off of him. He wasn't very good in terms of his shot making, quite obviously, in this game. But he was making the right decisions most of the time. So I don't think he was as bad as the numbers indicate. And his assists are pretty good there. Now, he did have 6 turnovers. That's too many for anyone's liking, but he was the number 2 guy on the team in terms of plus minus at +1. So it wasn't like Trae was terrible. He just didn't have the best shooting night in the world. From here, the standings are as such. The Hawks are a half game behind Charlotte. They are now 2 behind Brooklyn for the 8 seed in the East. And they're still 4.5 games ahead of Washington, so no real concerns about that. But this is a play-in preview in every conceivable way, basically. And the Hawks now would have to go to Charlotte at the season ended today in that first game, which is not what you want to have to happen if you are the Hawks. So kind of a lost bit of ground there for Atlanta. Lastly, the Hawks do not play again until Friday. In fact, the NBA largely takes Thursday off. There's one game on the schedule in the entire league on Thursday, and it's Pistons Magic at 7 o'clock. So the NCAA tournament is here. By the way, if you missed the podcast yesterday, I had some audio issues on that show, but with myself and Rafael Barrow talking about the NCAA tournament and the NBA draft, that's still very much available on the feed. But no game Thursday. They return back to Atlanta and then play the Grizzlies on Friday. John Morant actually missed the last game for Memphis, so that's something to keep an eye on in advance of that game on Friday. But Memphis is 48-22. They are very good. We'll see how Trae responds to his getting dinged up tonight, as well as Gallinari and Collins. But a tough matchup for sure, even though it's at home where the Hawks have been pretty good this year. Memphis is very, very good. So that'll be an uphill battle in some respects, especially if Ja is able to go. As a programming note at the end of the podcast, this will be the last show of the week for me. I'm on the road, as obviously, given my situation. I'm also slammed with NCAA tournament coverage. I very, very rarely do not do a podcast after a game, but I don't have time, to be honest with you. After the game on Friday, I'm pretty much slammed, and I'd try to be as candid with the audience as possible. So our next show will be Sunday night, wrapping up the next 2 games. The Hawks play the Grizzlies on Friday, and then they will actually host the Pelicans on Sunday. So we'll do a show about those 2 games on Sunday evening into Monday. So my apologies for the lost show there, but we still did 4 this week. Still very busy on the podcast and more content than most people would give you. But please be patient with me on that one. Also, please subscribe to the show. I'm trying to get everyone to subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. If you're an audio-only listener, I do understand that. I promise I do. But it definitely helps the show if you subscribe to YouTube. It just takes 1 click. It's very easy to do that, as well as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, etc. Thank you for listening to the podcast. As always, please follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Hawks. Follow me on Twitter at BT Rowland. And we'll see you at the end of the weekend.